Good afternoon. My name is Kinam, and I'm a staff member at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and I would like to welcome you to MetroTalks, an ongoing series of public forums to seed and exchange ideas on how the Bay Area can transform for the better. Today's panel is meant to shed light on the critical role of serving on the Policy Advisory Council. As a former member of the council before I joined the agency as a staffer, I can attest at what a unique and crucial opportunity it is to sit on this diverse body of informed and dedicated citizens. The next 60 minutes will be split between a conversation with our panelists, followed by a moderator audience Q&A session. Some quick housekeeping items. Audience members will be able to ask questions via Mentimeter throughout the session, with questions answered in the second half. And staff will also be monitoring the YouTube comment feed if you prefer to ask your questions on that platform. We're going to briefly check out the Mentimeter platform to get everybody some practice. So I will put that in there. So open up your web browser, either on your computer or your phone, and go to menti.com. And then you're going to enter the access code 48 45 18 12. We're going to do a few warm-up icebreakers to make sure that you all know how to use this. And you can see we have 9 counties within the inner core of the Bay Area that touch the Bay waters, and we just want to hear from you so you can let us know, where are you accessing us right now? Looks like we got the 2 Bay Bridge counties represented, or areas, East Bay and San Francisco. All right, now we're gonna, this is really just to make sure the technology works for y'all. Let's look at the second question. How would you rank the Bay Area's challenges? There's no right answer here. We're just asking you what stands out as the most fundamental barrier that impacts all of us here in the Bay Area. So you'll rank between housing affordability, economic inequality, racial inequity, and transportation options. What strikes you as the biggest challenge? And this is pretty in line. Housing affordability has remained a big challenge before the pandemic, throughout, and into the future. It's on top of everyone's mind. Now, this last one on Mentimeter is called Ask Me Anything. This is what we're going to use for entering questions for the panelists. This slide is what we'll come back to later in the panel, and it'll be active throughout today's session. So you'll be able to enter into these questions and also upvote questions from other audience members. Staff will be monitoring this page as well as our YouTube comments throughout the presentation to gather your questions for the second half of our talk. And with that, I'd like to pass the mic off to MTC Executive Director Therese McMillan, who will be moderating today's session. Go ahead, Therese.
Okay, thank you so much, Kinam, and welcome to everyone to this summer's first Metro Talk, where we come together to reflect on what is happening in our region and the critical issues facing our various communities that make up those 9 counties that we were introduced to earlier. It's a critical time as well for lifting up equity. And this is based on the shared vision that was adopted by both MTC and ABAG of a just and fair inclusion in a Bay Area where everyone can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. So we're really excited to continue conversations with 3 perfect guests, 3 of our Policy Advisory Council members who have contrasting experiences and hail from different parts of the region, and have been extraordinary contributors to the work of the council so far. So what I'd like to do is introduce them. I believe that they'll be joining us on the screen. Randy Kinman was formerly a planning commissioner for the city of San Jose. She represents and works with communities of color and low-income individuals, developing residents' leadership skills while providing training and education. Ms. Kinman is currently chair of both the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Association and the Burbank Del Monte Neighborhood Advisory Committee, as well as a trustee for the West Valley Mission Community College District. She has served as chair of the Policy Advisory Council and chair of the Regional Transportation Plan, 2035 Equity Analysis Subcommittee that supported inclusion of a snapshot analysis of data gathered on regular intervals between regional transportation plans. So Randy's contributed a lot and makes reports monthly to the commission on the work of the council. Our second panelist is Christina Gotuaco, and she is a director of the California Housing Partnership, an affordable housing finance and policy nonprofit. She also regularly volunteers in workforce development training. Her ongoing ties to economics, universal design, and urban planning bring her to the Policy Advisory Council, and those skills are well needed in the portfolio of the Commission in APAC. Previously, Ms. Gotuaco managed capacity building projects for a multi-family nonprofit developer, and in her prior role at AC Transit, spent 5 years collaborating with local transit agencies for MTC's Hub Signage program. Through a personal and professional network that spans most of the 9-county Bay Area, she has a deep connection to the region's transit and transportation issues and its future outlook, which has been something, as I'm sure she and the other policy advisory councils are deeply vested in, which is the work of our Blue Ribbon Task Force and really looking to reshaping how transit will emerge out of the pandemic and better serve our customers. Our third panelist is Mr. Adrian Mendoza, who is a photojournalist who spent 23 years in California's Central Valley, regularly photographing modes, infrastructure, air quality impacts, and evolving transportation alternatives for commuters from the Central Valley to the Bay Area. Since moving to this region, he has photographed many projects, including Highway I-80, the Bay Bridge, many San Francisco skyscrapers, Mission Bay, Caltrain, SFO, container ships, and ferries in the Bay, and the Transbay Terminal construction. While Mr. Mendoza is grateful to be able to continue his love for photography working in the public relations department at Santa Rosa Junior College, he is also passionate about the arts and spends time advocating for social justice. So with those introductions, I'd like to jump into our main session, which is asking questions of these great panelists. And let me start let me remind the audience to use the Q&A box for questions to put in for later discussion. But with that, let me open with a question for everyone, which is, what made you think of applying to the Policy Advisory Council? And Adrian, why don't we start with you?
Well, for most of the time that I lived in Santa Rosa, which is where I am right now, I did not have a car, so I relied on public transportation. And working at the junior college, sometimes Santa Rosa Junior College, sometimes I would need to work late, and the buses would not run late, and so I'd end up walking the 4 miles to my house, after hours. And so part of my interest in this was to get some input and see if I might be able to represent some of the concerns, both as a Latino, as someone affiliated with the college, and also someone who regularly used public transit. And so that was, I had a little bit of as a journalist, I was not allowed to get involved politically, but I was involved in Recycling Commission in Modesto and also the Arts Commission for a while in between my jobs over the years. So I've always been interested in public input or the volunteering to get some input for advisory councils.
Oh, that's terrific. And certainly your lived experience is something that you can bring forward, which is so important in the engagement work we do. Christina, what about you? What brought you into the Policy Advisory Council realm?
Hey, I think it's similar to Adrienne. I grew up in the Bay Area, didn't have a car for the first couple of years of high school, obviously, and it would take, if I had to take the bus, it would take about an hour and a half or an hour and 20 to get from home to school and vice versa. And then later on when I moved back, so I studied urban planning in LA and was there for 3 years without a car too, and had the car in my last year. And so got to know the systems down in LA, the transit and the transportation systems, came back up here. And since then I've had a variety of commutes, like taking BART to bus or driving over the Golden Gate Bridge, which I like to joke was my most expensive subscription service, and or taking the bus, like just different modes of transit, trying to get to family with or without a vehicle. And I think, as a lot of Bay Area folks know, it's kind of hard to live here without a car if you're going to different counties or trying to visit people across the bridge somewhere, across any of the bridges. So I really wanted to be part of a body like this, where I could voice some of my experiences and my suggestions in a place where the system is being built, basically, and the system is being recrafted to try to better serve transit riders and just Bay Area drivers and everyone who lives here to get more efficiently to where they're trying to go.
Right. And I think you've really captured, that timing is everything. If you're going to be involved with the Policy Advisory Council, now would be the time. But of course, Randy, you've been involved for some time and have seen so many changes, I think, of late with the commission. So what can you offer in perspective as to, first, what brought you here and what kept you here?
First of all, I began my transit experience as a single mom with VTA and their dial-a-ride service, so that you could actually get transit to pick you up and take you to the main lines. And fast forward a couple decades, and I was working in neighborhood development as a neighborhood organizer in what was called the Strong Neighborhoods Initiative, and it was targeted to help lift up communities that hadn't received services from the city or the county or the state, and to develop programs and plans for them. And during this process, I kept hearing about regional bodies like MTC and BACMed and ABAG, and didn't figure how they really meshed with what we were doing until a community adjacent to us had their street, sidewalks, and road projects finished far ahead of anybody else. And it was because they were in a county pocket and they got money from MTC. So I wanted to figure out how that money was available to them and how we could get some of that. But that led me to conversations with my elected officials about the advisory body and how that was a place where I could actually influence the policies that drove money into neighborhoods and into areas on a more equitable manner, that it wasn't just my streets and sidewalks that needed to be repaired. How could we manage the money flow in a manner that created a better equitable outcome for neighborhoods across the region? And that was like sending me into, I don't know, a candy store, because I love working policy. I would rather work policy than organizing, and I would rather teach policy so that people can make these decisions for themselves and be their own advocates. And that was just the biggest thing that got me into it. And I will tell a story on myself. It doesn't matter when you join this particular body that you know everything about how it works, or how funding works, or how all the 9 Bay Areas and 27 transit agencies are connected. I swore I wasn't going to talk in the first meeting, but when it came to a discussion where they were talking about taking money from my transit agency to fund another transit agency that was in distress because people in San Jose didn't need transit, I at least could come back with, well, no, that's not true. And no, not everybody works in San Francisco. And I got 1 million people. So those 1 million people just in my city and the 2 million in my county actually need the transit that we have, and don't need to have our money taken away just because somebody else needs it. And can we work out something to make sure that one agency isn't shorted for the benefit of another? And I will say that the transformation along that arc in the last 15 years has led to, when we were discussing COVID disbursement and not knowing how the needs were going to be met, and actually not knowing what the needs were, I was really pleased to see the commission taking a stand of, we're going to hold on to money, and we're going to, on the second tranche of money, distribute according to the reality. We think this is where the money needs to go, but we don't know what's going to happen. And so for me, that was really exciting. And that kind of encompasses the entire span of a discussion taking place about, we're going to just take their money to, we're going to make sure everybody has their money.
Yeah, it's I think you've really captured the challenge and satisfaction of unpacking the policy black box and being able to really understand and know, it's complex issues with complex solutions, but vesting the time and having the experience of, users and people who are living in our region and experiencing that policy happen is so important. Christina, we've heard that your first professional work experience was as an MTC summer intern, a high school intern, right? 15 years ago. How have your experiences since then shaped your service on the council? Was there a lasting impression you had from your internship that's shaped your thinking now?
Yeah, actually, I was in the transportation department of the town of Colma, which was also the building department and public works, because they were a very small town. But yeah, I mean, it was a great way to have something on my non-existent resume, which then helped me. It helped me, get into college and then kind of pursue urban planning and public policy while I was in school. And I think it ultimately led me on this trajectory where I did end up at AC Transit working on the MTC Regional Hub Signage Program. And I think from that experience working there, I really got the backside view of this 27 transit agency system that we have in the Bay Area, where our role with that project was to try to help coordinate the signage at multimodal transit stations so that passengers could better connect between the different platforms of different transit agencies, whether it was BART to Muni or AC Transit to BART or VTA to Caltrain. So it was a nice overview of the entire Bay Area transit network, and it was nice to see how everyone was working together on that project to basically implement these wayfinding signs. And I think that kind of has led to now, hopefully, the next iteration of helping passengers get around the Bay Area, since I think the strength that MTC holds and the importance of kind of serving on this policy advisory council is being able to connect the dots between the agencies, see it from that overarching perspective, especially as like a lot of us are members of a particular geographical representation, and we're kind of distributed amongst the counties, and the counties kind of are a distribution of the transit agencies. But it's just nice to hear comments from people who live in other counties and work in other counties and bring up issues that are relevant to each jurisdiction and how it kind of interplays with the issues that I would experience too, or that I do experience as I'm trying to navigate through the different transit agencies. So I think it was a good stepping stone from then to now. And then even being on the council and being able to participate in a working group that was about the MTC internship program was great, and how they set up a summer academy this year to help more young people consider the transit field as a line of employment. So it's been great to be here, and then just to kind of come full circle where after AC Transit, then I was well, actually I still am in affordable housing now, the sector, but still being able to connect back to public transportation and transit.
Oh, that's a great story, and that trajectory is really interesting to hear. And speaking of trajectories, even a short one, I have a question for you, Adrian. You're about to complete your first term on the council. So based on that experience, looking back over those 4 years, what advice would you give for someone contemplating joining the Policy Advisory Council for the first time? Some either things to expect or things to prepare for. What advice would you give them?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I had learned was, and this would be my advice to any prospective applicants, would be to understand how so many elements are linked together. The integration of, when I first applied, it didn't occur to me that we would be discussing housing or sea level rise and bicycles and other modes of personal transportation. And so it's not just transit. That's what I mistakenly thought that this was about. But it's so much more. And if you're a well-rounded person, and I recommend for every single person to be as well-rounded as they can, to have many different interests, to just pursue them. And a friend of mine from San Francisco, Amy Trachtenberg, is an artist, and she just her art installation just opened at the end of the BART station. I'm trying to recall which one it is, going down towards Silicon Valley. And so even though you may not be interested in writing public transit, which I hope you are, but even artists have a place to contribute to that as well. And as a photographer as well, my real passion is aerial photography. So you can see that that tapestry behind me, woven tapestry, is an aerial photograph of water in the Central Valley, the California Delta. And so what that has allowed me to see, so that, the aerial perspective has allowed to see me the systems, the interconnection of it all, and that's where you're going to see the intrusion of salt water into freshwater areas and sea level rise. And it's not a dry subject at all. It's very interesting. Okay.
Well, yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that recognition of this intersectionality of all of these different disciplines as to how it impacts any one of them singularly. And if anyone has had a chance to see that happen, it would be you, Randy. You've led this body for 2 terms and sort of know it inside and out. And what are your perspectives from that unique leadership view of what the Policy Advisory Council can and cannot do in terms of, generating change? And you mentioned some of it in your opening remarks, but is there something more that you would advise future PAC members to concentrate on in terms of directing their energy toward affecting that positive change?
I would say, and I really appreciate Adrian's comments about the intersectionality of everything, and to bring that into the forefront of what you are looking at it when you join this body. You may be interested in housing. You may be interested in making your bus line run better. You may be interested in social justice or healthcare. It all comes here. Every single bit of it comes here. You don't have to be an expert in all the fields. You just need to bring your insight from your particular passion into the conversation. And it all gets weighted. It all gets kind of thrown into the blender and mixed up, and then you find the cross pollination that happens with all of this. And having grown up in the Bay Area, there is no difference between San Martin, which is South County, Santa Clara County, and the very edge of North Napa County. That the interests, the problems, and the solutions are all the same. You just have to figure out how to make them all work on a regional level. The Policy Advisory Council cannot come put a street light in at the end of your block like you want. It cannot light up your street. We aren't capable of making those decisions. We don't actually have the ability to force action at the local level. We can, however, influence the policy that makes sure your departments of transportation, your housing departments have the overarching realistic policies to impact the funding that does come to you, and to create. And that was the one thing that I loved about all of this experience, was seeing the different money pots that come in from a regional level that can help augment what happens on a local level. We don't, as a body, go march on the Capitol and say, this is what we want. What we do is we give everybody the information to go out to their constituencies and to lobby for the money that they need based on the pots that are there, and to really advise people of what's out there. There is a lot of information that never seems to trickle down to the street. So for us to be able to go out into our communities, whether it's public health, whether it's transit, whether it's housing, or the disability communities, and say, this is coming up, this is something you should be aware of. To me, that's really exciting.
The notion of being emissaries of education in this space is a really important one, I think, for the Policy Advisory Council, because it's empowering for you to be able to share that information, be able to then have the communities receiving that information feel like they know more, and again, feel like they can be empowered to speak for themselves. And look, it's all about trade-offs and compromises and negotiations, and sometimes getting to the front of the line, as you mentioned. So, that's so important in this really complex environment. And thinking about all of that through an equity lens, because that's something that I know since I've, rejoined MTC, I wanted to, ensure that equity was being infused through all lines of MTC's business, not just left, for the last thing to consider at the end of a process or project impact. So what do you think could be done to improve the council's experience and better serve MTC's commitment to advancing equity? I would say that you've already done an extraordinary amount. I think you as a council took on that charge of, very seriously, and as a front and center focus for the commission and ABAG's work. But looking ahead, what other things do you think need to be done or reinforced in that space? Randy, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. Having kind of been around for a while and gone through several transitions with MTC, I have to say that the comment about laying equity on over after everything's done really strikes home, because that's what we were doing. And I think we've pushed a lot to make it. I think the last year and a half, the COVID world has taught us that if we really want to be equitable in how we design and develop policies, that we have to make it easier for people to participate. And we have, in the last 18 months, been able to put people on committees, put them into task force, put them into working groups in a way that brings those voices to the actual ground level work as policy is being developed. Before it's written and before it comes to us as a body to make suggestions, our voices have been in that mix, and we bring other voices with us. So if Christina's working on the new internship programs, I know, that she's bringing along those voices with her. And so that has been really, to me, the biggest aha moment, that out of all of the sludge of the last 18 months, we actually managed to be more productive and have more voices at the table. And anytime you can do that, you create a more equitable field and a more equitable playing field.
Yeah, I completely agree. Adrian, what about this question from your perspective, and particularly given your deep history in equity issues in your work?
Well, speaking from a personal perspective, up until 2 months ago, I lived in an area of Santa Rosa, which would be usually commonly called the other side of the tracks. In Santa Rosa, it's called Roseland area. It's where the low income, large percentage of Latinos there live. You won't see the bike share anywhere near in the area. You won't see working hours for transit inside there. So I think those are major issues that need to be addressed, and that's something that's been brought up by many people, on the council, about having transit available when people actually work. And the same thing with like the SMART train and BART as well. And of course, there's safety issues as well. And going along with that same Roseland area where I lived up until 2 months ago, I got out of that same low-income house that I'd been in for 5.5 years, only because I attained senior status. I mean, so you shouldn't have to be over 65 years old or over 55 years old to be able to get an affordable place to live and to have access to first and last, so you can make the down payment on your rental or your house. And so I think that those are issues that need to be addressed as well for equity issues, and that's what I've seen from my perspective.
I've said often that in really dealing impactfully with equity, that lived experience is just as important as any modeling input that we do in our analysis, and those experiences, and the Policy Council being a forum where those lived experiences can be translated into policy considerations and the like is so important. So Christina, we'll sort of wrap up with you, because I think it's fair to say you're an example of our next generation of professional leadership and contributions in the field, for sure. So what are your perspectives on equity, particularly, again, given that, as a younger professional, you probably also have a different perspective on what the future really can and should be as well. So what are your thoughts on this?
That's a nice question. I think I think just having this seat at this table is equity building for a lot of residents of the Bay Area who are represented by one of these 27 people. And I always learn something every time from somebody else's comments on the council. So I just really appreciate being at this body. And we have this project called the Roadmap Home 2030 about in the next 10 years ending homelessness in California and creating housing opportunity at all levels of incomes, and especially for low income residents of California. And we have a resident leader on that in that group, Zella Knight, who she always says the most important thing is the seat at the table, and it has to be a permanent seat at the table. And I think it's because sometimes you're the only person there who's going to say a certain thing. Like, even though we are 27 people, sometimes only one person in the entire group is going to make a certain comment about their region or about their issue. And sometimes people are uplifting different issues that, like, it even came up in the council meeting this past week that everyone thinks of something different for the same word. So some people are thinking of like skateboarders versus bicyclists versus people pushing strollers versus people in wheelchairs. And you really need that diversity in the group to uplift issues, because especially for issues of a minority of the group, people might not think of it until it gets mentioned. But then when you're helping the minority population achieve less hardship or more ease of use, more accessibility, you're still improving the system for everybody. So I think that's one important thing about always keeping equity in mind. And I'm hoping that moving into the future of transportation planning and housing planning in the Bay Area, it's kind of like sometimes we get caught up in, like, we have an initiative, we do the initiative, we have the campaign, we achieve the project, but it's not always with the minority groups in mind. And then we say it's a success because we completed the work, but if we're leaving out certain things that would just, improve the everyday life of somebody who otherwise experiences extreme hardship from how they have to access the bus or how they have to access the train, or how much they have to pay, or how they have to figure out how much they have to pay. It's just a load. It's a load off of someone's shoulders that could be built into the system with enough planning so that individual passengers aren't having to bear the burden of figuring out these logistics. So I think there are great examples throughout the Bay Area of, like, Clipper Card, that whole initiative where now you can just tag on and tag off of different transit agencies without having to figure out their fare structures. Or like the BART and Muni Unlimited Pass in San Francisco, which I wish was Bay Area wide, or things that let people budget for their transportation expenses on a monthly basis or an annual basis so that they don't have to experience like shock or surprise at what they're paying when they're just trying to get from A to B. So that's basically my thoughts.
No, and those are such great comments. And I think what you've done is illustrated MTC Chair Pedrosa's, consistent, framing, which is, it's not the project or the program, it's the outcomes of those projects and programs that we really need to be focused on. And I think you've all really captured the central role and contribution of the Policy Advisory Council about keeping all of us on the, as they say, straight and narrow about thinking about those outcomes and who's being impacted, who's benefiting, who's potentially being hurt, and making sure that our policies and programs really uplift everyone. So this has been an extraordinary conversation, but not to just keep it with all of us. I'm going to kick it back over to Keenam in case there are questions from the audience that we can share with our panelists.
Indeed, Therese, there are questions coming in both on YouTube and on menti.com. And I'll just remind our audience, you can go to menti.com and enter the access code 48451812, and you'll be able to ask and upvote different questions. And here we can see the first question. I'll make it bigger, make my head smaller. There you go. Says, is any support, economic compensation, transportation, translation, or other provided to members of this body to reduce barriers to participation in the commission? Thank you. Anybody want to have a go at that?
Randy, why don't you take that?
I'll take that one on. The compensation has been the same for as long as I've been on the body. You are compensated for mileage if you drive, you are compensated for transit, and you are compensated $50 per meeting for a maximum of 3 meetings per month. I advise the commission that I think that we need to take a second look at that, simply because I know for Adrian and I at the kind of the outskirts of the region, it doesn't cover the lost time at work. We've had people take vacation days. So, but yes, you are compensated, and it's going to be an ongoing discussion. It's one of the few advisory bodies that I've sat on where they actually, that was an upfront thing that was taken care of. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay. Here's another question. This is coming from Zelly Loden from YouTube, saying, outside of normal Policy Advisory Council meetings, how many hours per month or week do you spend on this commitment, and what does that entail? I think, Randy, you'll have a substantial answer to this. You spend a good chunk of time.
I'd like to hear what others do, but
yeah, exactly.
Mine is substantial only because as chair, I feel I need to be everywhere. So for me, taking on the position of chair meant I was committing a lot of time. So I don't think that's, I'll let the others chime in on that.
Christina and Adrian, what would you say in terms of the average amount of time that maybe per month that you put in preparing and participating in the council?
Well, there's the opportunity to opt in to one of several subcommittees. So if you do that, which there's the Equity and Access Subcommittee, or there's currently the Fair Coordination and Integration Subcommittee. So joining one of those ends up being another monthly meeting that's approximately 2 hours or so. But usually the week of the Policy Advisory Council meeting, I just set aside some time to read through the materials, since we get the agenda and the full meeting packet in advance. I think it's the same time it gets posted publicly online. But yeah, so just a couple of hours, depending on how much content is in the packet, to read through it and kind of get an idea of where I might want to make comments, so that when staff do the presentations in the meeting, there's already like a background information on what was anticipated and what to uplift, especially if time is running short in the meeting and they skim through some things that you would have wanted them to go through in more detail.
Okay.
I opted into a daily email blast that I get pertaining to MTC issues, news stories that I believe Marty is our administrative assistant who sends out these emails, and they're having to do with issues in the local press. And like Christina, I also am on a subcommittee, and I try and opt into the other subcommittee on occasion when I can. But the other thing that I would recommend is, since there's so much, I hate to use this word, but it's true, a lot of jargon in there and acronyms, and it really helps if you've been involved in other activities prior, going to city council meetings, school board meetings, so you get a sense of just the flow of how meetings, the administrative work, the what's it called, Robert Rules of Order, what is it? Just the procedure for engaging in meetings is something that will really help you a lot in being able to navigate through here. And just do your research, find out what those, sometimes an acronym might have multiple meanings, like PAC, how we were just advised of that the other day in the meeting, that it meant something else. And Martha was saying it doesn't mean this, it means that, when you put the PAC together. So just do your homework.
Yeah, well, thank you all, because again, I think it's a lot of ground to cover, that's for sure. But we do try as staff to prepare you well with memos and the like, and so it's always good to get feedback on how that's helpful and allowing you to spend quality time, but not your whole life, with the Policy Advisory Council's work, for sure. Do you have another question, Kino?
Yeah, you see up on the screen here, it's kind of a segue from Adrian's last answer. So how much experience do you need to be on the Policy Advisory Council?
Well, maybe I will take that one. We welcome all ranges of experience, as I think our panelists all suggested, that you can, and Randy, I think you said, you don't have to be an expert in this world of MTC in order to be an effective voice for how this is affecting you and affecting your community and where it is or isn't working. So, I would just say that enthusiasm and the commitment to, spend time, as Adrian pointed out, and Christina, coming up to speed and learning something that's admittedly kind of opaque at the beginning for a lot of folks. And I would say one last thing, and you all have mentioned it, and then the willingness to speak. You're so lucky to have a space at this table, and your voice is so important to be heard, that being willing to share, actively in that space is really the most important things you would bring.
Teresa, and also in addition to that, I have been extremely impressed with the quality of my colleagues on the council and staff as well. Answer questions. They're quite thorough. They talk, like Dave Vaughton, for example, introduced something called gamification that I'd never really understood before. And that was a way of making learning fun, making a game of it, so that way it helps engagement in there. And so that has helped me to give the skills that I have learned through the council have allowed me to gain skills that I can apply elsewhere in my personal photographic work and other work that I'm doing as well. And so it's being open. That's what the experience is, being open to learn, because if you have a question, people will be there to answer you. And I would once things open back up, and by the way, Teresa, when are things going to open back up for in-person meetings? Do you know?
Well, we're taking our cue from the city and county of San Francisco, largely in the main, as well as, dealing with a number of procedure mentions. One of you mentioned the procedural issues, right? Like, we're still trying to unpack the Brown Act and how we manage that if the executive order goes through. So we're in the fall. We'll probably be having opening the building to formal work and meetings at board levels, such as the Policy Advisory Council in October for sure, hoping the pandemic continues to not interfere with our lives. And yeah, so that's the thinking happening now.
For example, when I would go into when the meetings were in person there at Metro Center, I would take the bus to the Smart Stands train station to take me down to, now it goes down to not Salandia, what's it called? Down to in San Rafael, or anyway, to this ferry down there, and then that would take me over to San Francisco, and then walk over to Metro Center. But the thing that I would recommend was to make any effort you can to go into that structure, into that facility. And it's such a beautifully designed building, and the way that the wood was recycled, and it kind of gives a good theme spirit to what we're all doing, to recycling the wood, repurposing. It's very advanced thinking and very usable space inside there. So it was really a joy to have the meetings in there. And but of course, now we're on the Zooms and other virtual meetings. But I just love the experience of the meetings in person.
Yeah, well, we will be back soon. We will. Okay.
All right. So we have another. Oh, go ahead, Christina. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to also throw in that there's a very thorough onboarding. So I appreciated that.
So yeah, this next question is from Kathleen off YouTube. How important is the appointment process or letters of recommendation? If I have worked and experienced in multiple jurisdictions, should I try to get such letters from multiple places?
Randy, did you want to?
Well, we actually don't participate in the selection process, but I'm going to encourage people who have been in multiple jurisdictions, and I was talking to one of our council members today about that he really appreciates the fact that he gets that feedback from jurisdictions he's not familiar with. I would say that's up to the people who you would be appointing under. And I think, Therese, you can confirm that it goes to the county level and you're actually representing, and then it goes up through staff to the commission. So
yes, that is the process. But and again, I think one thing to also remember is that the Policy Advisory Council is our central marquee engagement forum, but there's lots of other ways to be involved with MTC's work as well. And I think the Plan Bay Area 2050 and the extensive engagement process we had there is one example of that. So definitely, my own personal experience, letters of recommendations are, always helpful. But as Randy said, these are appointments that are made by commissioners. And so if there's further questions on that, Keenan, maybe we can have Marty or you be able to provide some of those logistical details to help with our folks.
Can I add something to that, please? What I got in a little bit of what the late Senator John Lewis used to call good trouble. And so I was a bit of an activist myself, and I thought that would disqualify me from this council seat, when in fact I was surprised when I got it. So if you're active in the community, if you have passion for social justice or justice of any kind, then apply for it and just state that plainly. And whether you get letters or not, if you don't know anyone around to write you a letter, but if you can state it plainly, I think that you'll get a pretty good chance, because I think that's what the commissioners are looking for, is people who really want to make a difference.
That's great. So Keenan, I'm mindful of our time. We have 7 minutes left. Did you want to have one more question or have a last round with our panelists?
I think this is a good question that could maybe cover both.
Okay.
How has your work on the Policy Advisory Council directly impacted your community?
Yeah, so why don't we take that with each one of you, and as part of that, maybe also comment on what would be sort of the one takeaway that you would want listeners to hear in terms of, a pitch for joining the advisory council. So Adrian, you want to start, and then we'll go to Christina and Randy.
To be candid, I really can't say that my work has directly impacted my community, other than what I've learned as an individual and how I react to my community as well, and how I'm going to act going forward. It's not just going to be a reaction, it's going to be action. So, I'm sorry I can't be more helpful than that, but I can't give you a direct answer as far as how my time on it has directly affected the community. Thank you.
Yeah. Christina?
I would say, so I've only been on the council since last March, perhaps. So I came in the middle of somebody else's term. But yeah, in the short year and a half approximately, I think it's hard to say, because a lot of the things that MTC works on are like long range plans and comprehensive overviews, and it's a lot of things that you wouldn't notice an immediate thing at the local level. It would be something you see over time. But I do think a lot of our input in terms of what were priorities for the Blue Ribbon Task Force, for example, and how MTC was looking at what the principles were for distribution of pandemic-related funding to the agencies, was incorporated from what the Policy Advisory Council was saying and just voicing. And then also, I think because there was this unknown about the summer internship program and what it was going to be in the year of in this year as a virtual environment, I think some of us voiced also to not have it completely canceled, but to have at least a summer academy, which ended up happening for high school students. So I think there were ways in which it directly affected like communities that I do care about or am part of.
Great. Well, Randy, why don't you bring us home with your response?
Well, I can't say that I brought back dollars to the community like I started off with, but what you see, as Christina has mentioned it, and I think Adrian alluded to this also, is your ability to advise people what's out there and your ability to impact policy. I'm really proud of the work that we've done in the last few years, especially being able to increase affordable housing in the planned development areas. That's not something that you get to say as a price that you're taking back to your community. However, it impacts your community incredibly to be able to make an impact in those decisions that are made. So I will say that what I do is, when there are meetings, when there are things that people can participate in, whether it's a workshop or there's something in particular coming up that's going to be an impactful vote, you can push that out into the community. But I think the most important thing is your voice and your experience that you bring to the council as part of that blend of 27 people.
And I would, and first of all, thank you all so much. You have been an extraordinary panel. And I would just reflect on the question maybe through a little different lens, which is to say that one of the things that the Policy Council does, I think, is encourage the perspective that our Bay Area region is our community, that it is important to recognize that whether it's congestion or housing unaffordability or sea level rise and climate change, those affect beyond just our jurisdictional borders. And it's our role with our regional agencies to be able to acknowledge that we are part of that collective community. And you all do an extraordinary job in helping, folks, I think, realize and appreciate that perspective. So with that, Keenam, I'll hand it back to you to close it up. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Therese, and thank you, our audience, for joining us on today's Metro Talk. And a big thank you for our panelists, not only for your thoughtful contributions to today's talk, but for your years of public service on the panel. We really are grateful for you. You are what make the council actually work. A recording of this session is going to live in perpetuity on MTC's YouTube page. And we also invite you to complete a brief survey linked in the comments below. Let us know how we can improve Metro Talks and make suggestions for future topics. And with that, have a good day and a great weekend.